And I regretfully say that my family were slave owners as well.
Well,
But the slaves that we had, and
yeah, but
I know it will sound bad when I
No,
say
but
this,
don't-
but
but-
they were
but-
treated differently
sure,
from what you
but don't
see.
but see, our angle on this is that you don't have to say that. Slavery was accepted in that time period by the majority of the people in this country, and we don't judge. The point of this show is that we're not pointing fingers at people for what they did 158 years ago, because it's illogical, it's counterproductive,
And it's generalized.
and so we make a big point of that in the show. I can't wait to see this show and see how I handle all of that.
Okay.
But I don't apologize for people having.
Well, let me tell you about Frank,
Yes.
because my father's Frank, and my grandfather's Frank, and some other generations were named Frank,
Which just
which
confuses
was
everybody.
named after Frank, who was Colonel Ware's slave.
Got it.
He lived in Virginia, and after Kings Mountain, he moved here, and they had a large plantation. And Frank came the summer before and put in a cornfield and built a lean-to. So the next spring, Colonel Ware could bring his wife here and family here. Frank continued to operate the farm. Colonel Ware was off fighting battles. He was King Mountain. He was with Jackson in New Orleans. He fought many battles, but Frank was there constantly. Colonel Ware drafted the first Constitution for the state of Tennessee here at the fort. He and 4 members were appointed by John Sevier to do that. And so they drafted the Constitution. It was ratified and sent to Washington. It later had to be replaced, but Jefferson wrote in his letters that the document written here, the first Constitution, was probably the best written of the states that any state had done before. The reason it had to be replaced within a year, Congress had already defeated the attempt to establish the state of Franklin.
Right.
And because New York and Virginia said we need no more small states. We're large states, and they're getting unfair representation in Congress.
Exactly.
And they didn't want that to happen. So they rushed it through because Congress gave them a short time when Tennessee, because Middle Tennessee had joined them, Nashboro had joined them, and so it was a larger area, larger population. But they failed to have people to ratify it. The Assembly passed it, but the people didn't vote on it. So and it was sent to Washington. Congress adopted it.
Wow.
And it put it in place and made the mistake. And then a year later, they found out it really wasn't ratified by the people, so they had to redo the Constitution and submit it a second time.
Well, and
to
see how
ratify.
slowly things moved back in those days too,
Sure.
from one spot to the next.
Well, let's go back to this for a second, Jerry. So you're saying that Colonel Ware had a slave named Frank who basically ran the entire plantation.
Yes,
for him.
he did.
So he had sons, but yet he had the slave in charge of the plantation.
He did.
And then many of your descendants are named after the slave?
Named after him, yes.
Wow.
And when the emancipation came, his daughter, Susan, took the name Free. She called herself Susie Free. And on the plantation, if you see the original map, her house is right in the middle of the farm. And she refused to leave. She stayed with our family, and she didn't die until 1910. But some of my older cousins remember that she was always at the house. We called her Aunt Tess. She was part of the family, even though she really wasn't part of the family. She was one of our slaves. Slavery was a terrible thing. It was a terrible thing. But all slaves were not treated like
No.
what they're
No, thanks to Harriet.
They were hard workers, and
Thanks
they
for
didn't
Harriet.
have a choice. And they
Right.
somebody was telling them what to do. It was Frank.
But again, Frank was treated, and so was his daughter, like a member of the family.
As a member of the family.
Well, there were a number of slaves who were well educated enough to run plantations while
They
their
were
owners
all
were off at the
educated. They were
war.
all
And a
really-
number of them were female. Down in Alabama, there's a couple of them down there that ran the plantations while the owners were out in the battle. No, we don't do stereotypes here. We're not. And we just encourage people to get beyond that, get into the real details, because we're all human beings.
Of course we are.
And we all have to live in the time that we live in. We gingerly and playfully make fun of the women who come to see our show who are sitting there in pants dressed like men, which in our time period would have been exactly the way they've been treated.
Yes.
And there's no woman in Tennessee and wear a pair of breeches that would have been accepted in polite society. So, yeah, there's things have changed, and what we're trying to get, so again, I appreciate you wanting to apologize, but around here you don't have to, because we see things in its time.
And
that's what
again,
we're
we don't
trying
make
to teach.
generalizations. So what we learned back there, they were all treated a certain way, that was all one way. No,
Well, no.
there was no such thing as
That's
just one
Hollywood.
way.
That's Hollywood.
And it's Hollywood, exactly right. Or it's the ridiculous, little bits of information we're given in school about the Civil War. It just gives us a little taste. It's not the reality of what happened here. And I think that's why both what you do and what you do is so important. You're preserving your family's history. You've written 8 books about this. Your name is well known in this area, but yet if you don't preserve that history, it's going to die, isn't it?
Yeah, are being up by folks on the far side of the political spectrum that wants to destroy this country and its roots,
Right.
and its Christian base, and that's what it was. So we don't roll over and play dead here. We're going to do our best to try to keep American history alive in Pigeon Forge. With God's grace, this place will stay open, and we'll get in front of a lot of people. So
One of the stories that I was told by Mrs. Burden, I told you, I don't think I've told this gentleman. Miss Burden, Burden Hill is named after her. She lived down here, a black lady. She told me the story of the little boy who wasn't worth nothing. And to me, it sort of tells you about the nature of Sevier County people. James McMahon owned a huge plantation at Boyd's Creek. He also owned one here on Middle Creek. So he had a large amount of farms, and he did have slaves. So he had so many crops going and so much needed to be done that he needed additional slaves. So he had planned a trip to Charleston to the slave market. They took wagons and went to South Carolina, and that's where they purchased the slaves.
Which
and
we
brought
say
them
that
back.
in the play
yeah,
also.
we talk about
Charleston.
that being
Yeah.
one of the slave markets. Sure.
And so little James, who was 5 years old, was crying. He said, "Dad, he wanted to go. He wanted to go with his dad." His mother was saying, "No, absolutely not. He's 5 years old. He didn't need to go on this long, dangerous trip," because it was a dangerous trip.
Sure.
To take wagons to
Oh,
South,
you betcha.
South Carolina.
People didn't travel much back in
But-
those days.
But James Sr. decided he was going to take his boy with him. So they went to the slave market. And when they got there, the men all gathered around, and they had the auctioneer, and they had a little platform, and people, they'd bring the slaves on the platform, and they would auction them off. Well, James stayed down at these barracks. It was a wooden bunker-like area where the slaves were kept before they were put to sale, and there was a little boy in there about his same age with his mom and dad. Well, they came and took his dad away, and he was sold and was going to go to North Carolina. And then they came and got his mother, and she was staying in South Carolina, and the little boy was crying. So James had been there with him the whole day. It was the end of the day. And so he went to his dad, and James said, "It's time for us to go home. We've got what we need, and we're going to go home." And little James says, No, we can't leave this little boy. He's my friend. We've played all day long." And so he said, "No, we don't have room for him. We can't do that." And he said, no, he really wanted. Evidently, this boy had a lot of influence over his dad, because 2 times his dad had told him no, and he refused and kept going. So he said, "Okay, we'll find out." So he went up to the slave master, and he said, how much is this boy?" And he said, "He ain't worth nothing." He said, "But now I've got this man here who was crippled and had not sold." He said, "If you buy this slave, then we'll give you that boy for free." So he did it. He brought him home, and he stayed with James in the house, and he grew up in the house. When James died, the farm was left to his ancestors, and it was divided. Half of the property was given to James, the son, and the other half was given to the little boy that wasn't worth nothing. Mrs. Chandler, who then made deeds to all of the former slaves of James McMahon, received a parcel of the property in Boyd's Creek, because that little boy that wasn't worth nothing became one of the ancestors of some of the richest people in Sevier County. And they become artisans, craftsmen, the doctors who did the fine woodwork houses built out. I mean, he was asked to build the finest houses for the people. And then the brick masons, Those are all his descendants.
Sure.
The little boy who wasn't worth nothing. And they built most of the Sevier County blocks. Bricks were made by that group.
Right.
And the Andrew Johnson still stands in Knoxville because they built the post office and many of the buildings in what is now Knoxville.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, it's this kind of connection we need to make sure continues to be part of.
Absolutely.
We just, it's critical.
Because it fits in with what we're doing. And I know why we do what we're doing. We're trying to get that truth out. We're trying to put history back the way it is. This is my last question here for now, Mr. Ware. It's your name, it's your history, but where is your heart? Why is it that you put so much in this 8 books and all the stuff that you got? Give us your why for why you do that.
My grandfather was born in 1877, so he was an old man, and he'd take me hunting. We'd get a gun, we'd go up on the hill, go hunting. We'd set the gun down, and he'd tell me stories. He never shot the gun. Up there, we shot it. We sat there under the tree, and he told me these stories. And I've always had a love for history, and I was real fortunate when Lamar Alexander was governor. It was the bicentennial year, and so he appointed me to the bicentennial committee, and I got to work with Alex Haley.
Wow.
And Alex said 2 things to me that I'll never forget, and it really summed up what I believed anyway, and I guess that's why it just stuck with me. But he said, these stories that people have passed down, they may be seen through rose-colored glasses, and there may be some things that are not, either exaggerated or underemphasized, but there's history to those stories, and those stories are very important, and they should be saved. We need to save those things. And he said, when an old man dies, it's like a library burning to the ground.
Exactly.
All the information is lost. Those memories are gone. And some of those stories are not told again or have never been told.
Right.
So you've lost history. So I believe in telling stories and saving people's memories while they may be not completely factual. There's truth in all of those stories. It's important that we tell our children so that they know where they come from and who they are.
I try to stress to the school groups that come to see us, especially, that as a historian, my job is to try to read accounts of different things that happen from various angles, because everybody's got their own way of seeing it. But if you read enough accounts of an event from different sources, somewhere down the middle, they touch the same little piece, and that's what you're looking for. That's that little grain of truth. And that's what I look for. And that's the way that's how I've done my research all my life. So it's the same thing. And Alex Haley's correct. Everybody's got their stories. My granddad used to tell me all kinds of fantastical stuff too. So there's actually some reference to that sometimes in my show. But yeah, we're on the same page. I'm glad we met you. I'm tickled to meet direct descendants and of all these folks around here. So we're going to be calling on you a lot to give us more stories.
Oh, well, let's don't get into the Whaleys and the Opals because, gosh, there's some stories there.
Listen, I don't know if you've heard toward the tail end of the show now when the female character says, what goes on here stays here. You're talking about the camp. And I said, no, that's Las Vegas and Pigeon Forge, they'll rat on you.
Well, we're all cousins. If you can't talk about anybody here because we're all cousins.
So they'll rat on you here. And that gets a laugh, but I just added that the other day because I have a sense that that's what's been going on here for a long time.
So, guys, if you're watching this, you got to come make the pilgrimage now. Come here to Pigeon Forge. Come and see Ware's Valley. Come and see where Ware's Fort was. Come into Buttonwillow Civil War Theater and see Granddaddy's Watch, because both of these gentlemen are right. We have to preserve our history, and we must share it for generations to come. This is our history, all of us together. The Civil War was our story, all of us together, and it must be told. So go to ButtonwillowCivilWarTheater.com and get your tickets right now and come see Granddaddy's Watch. Mr. Ware, thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you here with us today. We can't wait to get more stories from you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll be chatting some more as soon as the camera's off, and then we're going to tell the good stuff.